Welcome back to the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting. We are on item 28.
Item 28 is from the Administrative Office to authorize and direct the Auditor Controller to post budget transfers. 1, decreasing appropriations in the administration budget and increasing appropriations in the cannabis regulation budget in the amount of $13,500. 2, decreasing appropriations in the code compliance budget and increasing appropriations in the cannabis regulation budget 10101010 in the amount of $11,749. 3, decreasing appropriations in the county council budget and increasing appropriations in the cannabis regulation budget 10101010 in the amount of $71,583. 4, decreasing appropriations in the insurance budget and increasing appropriations in the cannabis regulation budget 10101010 in the amount of $89,844,000. 5, decreasing appropriations in the Office of Emergency Services budget and increasing appropriations in the cannabis regulation budget 10101010 in the amount of $11,315. And 6, distributing the above referenced appropriations in the cannabis regulation budget as set forth on the cannabis regulation budget transfer 10101010 in the amount of $197,991.
Thank you. It's an administrative item. Mr. Alder, how would you like to go?
I'll just open real quick on this particular item. I know the cannabis budget has been before us several times. This is a much smaller piece that we're bringing forward in an effort to try and accommodate the fact that the fees become effective on December 23rd, Monday the 23rd. We've got a program in place with existing staff to begin accepting permits and subsequently accepting fees as well, beginning at the first of the year. And so our ask in this particular item is to help support the staffing necessary to not only start the program, but continue the permit process and site inspections, et cetera, that are necessary throughout the regulatory process for the remainder of the year.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
I have some questions. First, the salary portion of this that you have put aside was 114, I think, is what you have. What positions are those funding? Is that funding for? It's not really spelled out here.
Those are salaries for the 3 positions that were in the fee studies that are for the Cannabis Control Office. So the program manager, the department analyst, and the admin assistant positions. Right. But for clarification, we wouldn't be filling them on these transfers in any permanent way. So it'd be an opportunity for us to look at temporary options to fill those positions.
Okay, so either temporary or whatever. The question I have is, I see where you're pulling some of this money from, and you're pulling it out of budgets that exist. How much of this are you pulling out has to do with salary savings in any of these departments?
Well, a portion of it is salary savings. The item outlines where the funds are coming from. But
it does, but I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, our first effort was to try and identify salary savings, which in this case happen to be minimal, that are in the CAO's office. My approach has been that the Cannabis Control Office is under the CAO's office, so we try to contain it within the departments that I have direct supervision of. In so doing, we didn't have enough salary savings to accommodate that, so we moved on to other areas, as mentioned here, insurance, and then unfortunately we also moved outside of the CAO's office because we didn't have enough salary savings to cover just this initial piece that we needed.
Well, I asked some questions of Kathy Gomes on salary savings and where we are overall at this point. in time, and she says in her email that we have about 1.9 million in savings just in general fund salary savings. So I asked the question, if that's the case, and if we're shortchanging ourselves in insurance some way between now and the next 6 months, or an OES office, or wherever, would it be not wiser to maybe tap this 197 out of those salary savings versus going down this road that we're looking at? We could be coming back to the board asking to reallocate funds into these positions because in March we're short. We had an unexpected insurance issue or something.
So a couple points, very good questions. I appreciate those. The salary savings, the number Kathy has provided is very preliminary, but all of the salary savings that we have transferred from would be within that salary savings that you're speaking to. We're not in her calculation, so it's all from the same place in that case. I've tried to be really careful about how we approach it rather than have this transfer look like an advance mid-year. At mid-year, we all know that the salary savings is something that many of the departments will come back and ask for additional expenditures out of those monies. So I've tried to protect the process as much as possible, the mid-year process, and funding sources outside the CAO's office as much as possible in putting this transfer forward. So we didn't go into any departments that for example, any of the safety departments. We didn't go to the sheriff's department, DA's office, or anything like that. We've tried to accommodate it all within the CAO's office, and it could put us at risk. We knew some of our budgets could be at risk when we were having to fund this program of general fund salaries minus the budget. So we just tried to be really careful about it and contain it to as small portion as we could.
And some of that can be addressed at mid-year, so when we get some.
It can.
My next question is for Sarah, County Counsel. Going down this road that we're looking at here, none of these funds are recoverable if we go into revisit at mid-year or at some point later on when we go to a new budget. They're non-recoverable with any of the fees that are being taken in. Are they recoverable, or because we're allocating money from general fund into this, are they then expended without being recovered from the fees?
If I may.
Please. No, go ahead. You're talking about moving monies within the general fund.
No, what I'm talking about is we're funding from the general fund into a department and putting money into their budget because it's general fund money, and we're now funding this budget. At some point, when we start being able to use the fees that we didn't get a 4/5 vote on, is this money that we're setting aside and putting into this budget, the $197,000, recoverable from those fees?
Yes, is the answer to your question. So the timing of that will depend on what the logistics look like of it. But at the end of the day, those fees will go into a separate special revenue fund. We have both the general fund operating budget, the budget is set before you here, 10, 10, 10, 10. We will be tagging all of those expenditures so that we know which departments are actually paying for those expenditures and how much we're expending directly out of that budget unit. When we go back and ultimately have a budget, be it in this fiscal year or next, we will then budget to reimburse the general fund for any expenses that were covered by the general fund in this current window where we don't actually have a full operating budget authorized.
Okay,
So yes.
You're asking us to vote for this to create a budget.
Correct.
So we are creating a budget, not when we come back and have real budget. This is a budget that you're asking for us to fund. And so I'm not sure if my question was answered. I understand what you said about tracking, but we don't need to track anymore. If this is the budget, whatever expenditures come out of it,
Well-
that's what it is. So that was my question, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I got a clear answer. Are these monies that we are expending here recoverable to the general fund through the fees that we'll be taking in with the program once we start on December 23rd taking applications?
Yes, it is. And in fact, what my intention would be is to come back to the board at some point when we've collected the fees and we have some clear numbers on how many permits. We've issued letters of conditional authorization. We know exactly how many permits have been to the point that we've collected fees. We'll know the amount of fees we have collected at that point, and then I'd ask for reimbursement back to these accounts. Okay. The fee money can only be expended for cannabis activities. So
correct.
We wouldn't want to create the draw on the general fund, and we want to reimburse these budgets, but until we have the fee revenue to evidence to the board, this was the way we needed it to go to get the department started.
I just wanted to clarify
So
that.
that's a good
So
question.
is that, you agree with that, Sarah?
That's consistent with my understanding, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
And that's fully our intention.
Other questions from the board? Supervisor Mills?
Well, let's go back to the insurance piece again. It's 89,000 roughly. Where exactly is this money coming from? The premiums, liability insurance premiums, are we in a surplus on premiums that we can take 82,000 out of it?
Exactly. The premiums for the year have been paid. After conferring with the Director of Human Resources, Ms. Hawkins, the full balance in that account at this point is available to be reallocated. The delta approximately.
So I'm going to ask a question, and all you need to do is say yes. Are we putting the county, yes or no? Are we putting the county at risk because of taking this money out of the insurance premiums? Or do you feel that we will be able to survive through mid-year to the rest of the year with removing this kind of money from it?
Certainly from that object code and that budget unit, the answer is yes, we can remove that money now. Those expenditures have been made 100% per the Director of HR for the year.
So in case I missed something, this 10-10-10-10-10 account is a new org key?
It's actually the same org key as the original cannabis regulation budget under the UO. It didn't have any activity in the last fiscal year, so it's been dormant, but it is the same org key as what's been on the books for some time.
And it was actually put forward in the budget development process, and Krista's spoken to this previously. There's no funds allocated in it currently when we brought it forward in the budget process, but it has come forward several years as a zero budget.
As a zero budget, okay, because it wasn't actually having any funds in the budget book for this year.
Correct.
That's, okay. All right.
No further questions from the board? And I will open up for public comment.
Good afternoon, Vicki Reinke. Yeah, I see, again, we're trying to find some money to implement an ordinance that nobody wants, but that's beside the point. I guess there's a couple of questions. One is, what is the county's obligation to implement an unfunded ordinance? When it was voted in, we knew we had no budget, we knew we had no funding, so I'd like an answer to that. I know the public never gets an answer to any of their questions, but I think that's a legitimate question to have answered. And I think some of the questions were asked at the dais about the money, where the money's coming out of those accounts. how does that affect the future of our county based on trying to repay these things through a fee? The other piece of this that I've talked about in the past, and it comes here again, is this is still a huge problem in our county to implement this ordinance with the requirements that are given. We know that it takes a lot of staff, it takes a lot of time, it takes all of those things that we don't have. And that's what we did with the UO. Everybody just said, let's just go for it. Well, we're still in the same spot, and that bothers me, and I know you're trying to find some money so you can start doing whatever that's going to cause a huge problem for our county. Employees and staff, the public, you know, we want to know that we're going to be safe because you're going to do this correctly this time, but you have to do a lot of things with code enforcement, with building codes, with all those departments have to be out at these sites. And we know in the past that hasn't happened. As a matter of fact, with the ordinance for the ban, they were supposed to go out and inspect all these properties that had been given a permit. Not one was ever inspected. So how do we know going forward we can trust the county to do the job they're supposed to do when they start giving out permits and doing the job that's required to do this properly? So anyway, I hope that, you know, you can reconsider, and I don't understand how a county, yes, you passed an ordinance, but how you can't say it's not ready, we have to delay it for 3 months or whatever it is that's going to take to do it right. Thank you.
Your next speaker.
Well, here we are again, trying to find the most difficult way to do something. As you've been around county government for a while, we know that during the budget season, department heads come forward. They have their plan, they have their task, a list of things to do. They come up with how much money they're going to need. The board debates it. The public gets to comment on it. Then it's voted on. Should be locked in. Not with this board. Not with this board. You wanted to do it the hard way. You're so maniacal. You're so crazy to get this done that following procedure is the last thing you want to do. You ought to haul down that flag with the tree on it and hoist the Jolly Roger instead, because what you're doing is going around to departments and taking money away from department heads who did it right. They came up with their budget, it was approved last year, and they'll do the same thing next year, but not this group. You're going to take it now. You're going to do it the wrong way. And then you're going to try to put pressure on other supervisors to join your gang and defeat the whole budget process. Why even have a budget? Why have a budget process? Next year, everyone just bring forward all the stuff they want to do, vote on it, and spend the money. And when the CAO says, well, I think some of this is going to be staff, you damn straight is going to be staff. What else is there? These are people. And now they're going to be serving two masters. Where's the union in all this? Is that what you do with employees? Say you've got two bosses to satisfy. That's not good management practice. But you're going to do it anyway. You can't, you're blinded to this for some reason. And when I see people this rabid about doing stuff and doing it wrong, it makes me wonder what's in it for you. No one takes chances like this. No one does this kind of stuff just for the heck of it. The entire purpose of government is gone, and you guys have destroyed it. 3 of you have. And we've got 2 supervisors that ask the right questions. I know that they don't want to, be blamed for, the lack of services, because that's what's going to happen. You're taking services out of the public. You're taking 200 people and placing them ahead of 42,000. When we've got housing developments, permits, we've got people who want to do things, businesses in this county, legitimate businesses that don't violate federal law, and they're going to be made to wait because you've got a special classification, your buddies, that are going to get a shot to go in and get it done. And it doesn't make any difference if they do it right or not. EIR, to hell with it. You got a lawsuit. General plan, to hell with it. You got a lawsuit. How many things are you going to do to create a lawsuit every time you do something? You might want to stop and rethink what you're doing. You might want to stop and rethink, is this the way we need to go? I don't think it's going to work out for you. I really don't.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Aurora Weatherby, District 5. I'm not at all happy with what you're going to do here. It's an end run around the 4/5 vote that you're trying to do. You're taking money from departments that has already been budgeted, and you have somebody that is going to manage this that has less than a stellar reputation on a management of money. I have to watch my money. I pay everybody that sits up there. I pay for all these salaries that go into this county. I want emergency services to have their money. You've eliminated the sheriff's office and the district attorney's office out of this so that you can have total control, the three of you, Supervisor Garamendi, Supervisor Callaway, and Supervisor Stopper. You eliminated the sheriff's office because you don't want them to see the criminal background checks that come in so that you can make all the decisions on what growers are going to get their marijuana permit. I mean, it's ludicrous. You know, the scientists say that the world is made up of neutrons, protons, and electrons, but they forgot to say that their people are made up of morons. Thank you.
Next speaker.
The budget has been approved by the state of California. You are circumventing this and gambling with the approved general fund dollars, causing the Calaveras County constituents to be at risk of losing this money. How can you guys justify gambling with general fund monies? How can you do that? I just don't understand it. We deserve to be heard. And you guys have meeting after meeting until you have the objectioners so tired out that they don't show up anymore. And I am one person who objects to this. I object to it violently. And you are taking the government of Calaveras County and making a charade out of it. And this department that you want to fund is going to be run by someone who will be given absolute power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. To leave out the DA's office, to leave out the sheriff's office from this is just beyond the pale. I can't believe that you would be so willing to cause us to be in a position like this. It just doesn't make sense to me that you would put us at risk like this.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to address item 28? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for further discussion or a motion. Further questions? Supervisor Mills?
I'm certain everybody's going to want to know why I vote or why I think the way I do. I consider this to be a very innovative approach. Had never thought about it myself. The idea of an obligation to implement, I can't buy that simply because there are many laws that are currently enacted that are unfunded. I'll give you an example. Rohrabacher Farr is one. And although you could see a 3/5 vote today or a 4/5 vote, a 3/5 vote would be legal based upon what I'm seeing in this. But I think it also comes down to how did we get here? And I'm going to be very consistent in my approach to this. So my answer will be no.
Supervisor Toffenelli?
Well, I look at it a little bit different. This ordinance is in existence. It's going to start implementing on December 23rd. Whether I vote for this or not, it is, in fact, legal, what is being asked to be done. There's nothing wrong with it. It's innovative, like Supervisor Mills said. I think it's very well thought out that take this approach because funding needs to be for this positions that were mentioned by the CAO to at least implement this program. I did not vote for this ordinance, either one of them, but the board did, and I'm part of this board. And I have to give direction to staff. I have to be able to give staff the tools that they need in order to implement any ordinance that comes before this board and passed by this board, whether I vote for it or not. Is it fair to the employees? Is it fair to the ones that are going to be affected? It may not be effective. You may not have any immediate implications in planning or code or what have you, but at some point you will. But you will have an admin office where this is going to be housed, where the employees that he's asking for funding to be housed. And you talk about chaos with the urgency ordinance. I'm not sure you're going to be able to get employees in place by the time of the 23rd. We're talking next Monday. You haven't even advertised because you haven't had funding for it. This is fastly approaching, and you're going to have a number of people, and we don't know yet how many people you're going to have outside your front door 9 a.m. on the 23rd wanting to fill out applications. I don't want to look at this like I'm going to be dead set against it simply because I don't feel it's right, and I don't. I didn't vote for this ordinance. I don't feel it's right. I wouldn't have voted for this ordinance with what was put into it as far as the size of the lots that you can grow this 1 acre on. I was dead set against that. I think staff was against that. But I don't want to get it back into this ordinance because it's already passed. It is what it is. This is a very difficult decision. That's before me. It's not going to matter whether I vote for it or not. It doesn't matter at this point. All it takes is 3 votes. And that's what's here before us today. I understand where Supervisor Mills is, and I understand where some of the people that spoke here today, but I don't think they fully understand the fact that this is going to be implemented. It's a done deal. You can't go back and say we didn't have 4 votes for this ordinance. You didn't need 4 votes for this ordinance. You can say that I'm caving into it. I don't see it that way. What I'm looking at is, yes, it's going to be implemented whether there's 3 votes or not, but I'm looking at, is it fair to staff having to put this ordinance in place, having to deal with this ordinance? They had nothing to do with this vote. They've been working directly behind the scenes trying to get this thing off the ground. Would they prefer working on something else? I don't know, but that's what they were directed to work on. That's what their job is, given direction by the CAO and admin office to work on. They've spent many hours on it. Sarah's crew spent many hours on it. Ethan is consumed since October, before October, putting that whole thing together. Is it fair to them to have to implement this thing without funding? I just can't, in all reality, think that's right, regardless whether I agree with this ordinance or not. So I will more than likely be voting yes on this, simply because I understand where it puts admin office and the employees of this county.
Thank you very much. Further comments or a motion? Supervisor Stopper?
We thank you for that, Mr. Toffanelli. We do have an obligation. There are laws passed in the state. The Permit Streamlining Act of the 70s comes to mind. There's certain things with CEQA that you can't just hand a person permit, but you have to proceed with the process, and that's the point. I think staff's done a great job with the direction they've been given, and we need to continue supporting staff, whether that we agree with what's going on or not. The majority has spoken. There's been points in the past where a majority has spoken in other directions, and staff has carried that out, and I appreciate that they've always, whether gears have switched, have always done well with their job. So with that, I'll hand it off for now for anybody else that has any comments.
Any other comments? Was there a motion?
I move we authorize and direct the auditor controller to post the budget transfers.
We have this item has 5 pieces to it.
Right.
Item 1 through 5 are together. Item 6 sets alone. So I think in order to have a motion that will
Okay.
work, check me if I'm wrong, Krista, we'll need to have a motion either on 1 through 5 or item 6.
So
Reading that right?
if you,
It was on the bottom.
correct.
Alternative 1, I believe, carries 1 through 5, and alternative 2 will
Right.
carry 6, right?
Yes.
Actually, just in order to clarify, so the recommendation of staff is for items 1 through 6. So the first 5 budget transfers actually reduce the general fund contributions in the departments we discussed, and then item 6 provides for how those appropriations will be distributed in the cannabis regulatory budget.
So we should do 2 motions.
So you can do, one motion could be made in the event that alternative 2 were to be moved. In that case, then we would do 2 motions and essentially do a second, actually, but I guess 2 motions, one for the special revenue fund budget transfer piece, and items 1 through 5 would not be moved, and item 6 would be made with that. We didn't discuss that option, so in order to affect staff's original recommendation, that would just be 1 motion.
Is it all right if we discuss that option
So
prior to making a motion, Ms. Keller?
Certainly. Yes.
So alternative 2 is where the board could choose to appropriate revenue for what would be approximately 16 permits in order to cover the appropriations requested in the cannabis regulation budget. Were that to happen, then we would not need to make the general fund reductions in the departments that we've already discussed, and those fees would instead be covered by the revenue that we think is, quite frankly, a low estimate of what we anticipate receiving between now and the end of the fiscal year. If we were to do that, then we would do that consistent with what we had discussed previously, where all those funds would go into a special revenue fund, and then as fees are incurred in the operating budget, they would be released by the auditor controller and deposited into the general fund operating budget. Because of that inter-fund transfer, that would require 4/5 vote of the board.
So everybody sort of understand what we're talking about? Supervisor Toffenwell.
Can you restate this?
Sure. Okay. So if instead of making reductions to the general fund departments that we discussed, we could budget revenue in the same dollar amount, which for the board's information would be approximately 16 permits worth of revenue. And that revenue could cover this $197,000 budget, which would alleviate the need to make general fund reductions that we've previously discussed. That would be a 4/5.
Right, and that would be 4/5, which we
I won't
just
vote for that.
voted against that.
Right.
Well, you're right, that's what we took on the last two meetings.
Correct.
So, but that is
Correct.
an alternate not to go and,
It's an
pick
alternate at a much smaller
alternative.
dollar amount with much fewer permit revenue, or much, lower revenue anticipated. But yes, that would be consistent with what we'd previously discussed.
understand?
Yeah, I would not vote for that.
Yeah, considering we went through that scenario and it didn't pass on a 4/5, I'd like to go back to what is being recommended.
Sure, so that would be
With
one
the-
motion.
That's right, with one motion. Okay,
Okay,
as recommended. So I move that.
okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do a roll call vote, Madam Clerk?
Why?
Okay, we could do it by voice. I wasn't sure if you wanted to do it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No?
Carries 4-1. Supervisor Mills in dissent. Motion carries.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Sure. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 2:15.
A waste. It's just like
Item 29 is from the Administrative Office to receive a presentation regarding the county's HVAC infrastructure and authorize and direct the CAO to investigate potential financing options for HVAC replacement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Garamendi, supervisors, and public. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk today about something that's been before the board several times, at least in terms of their priorities. Just a note for the public that are here in the room, there are copies of the presentation on the podium. There's copies of the presentation for the board in front of your seats. Before we get going, I will introduce my colleague here from Compass Energy Solutions. This is John Mattice, again from Compass Energy Solutions. He'll have a piece in this presentation, and then you'll notice that Patrick Martin, our Facilities and Grounds Manager, is here, and he'll have some talking points as well. We'll get started here. Topic of discussions today. The item obviously speaks to the nature of how we may finance or consider financing options for a pretty robust HVAC replacement program. But there's some context to it that I want to be able to outline, some legal provisions under the government code that will influence our decision and how we got to where we're at and led to the feasibility study that gives us the overall cost of the project. So I'm going to walk through each of those things, and we'll talk about some of the cost benefit of just a pretty generic financing as an option. and what potential next steps may be. So just to provide context for particularly the public that haven't had opportunity to follow this, on April 18th, 2018, the board unanimously agreed to direct staff to work on particular projects, one of which is HVAC replacement. And what you'll see here is this is a snippet from the April 18th, 2018 minutes. And then again on March 26, 2019, as you'll recall, the board took action here to create an ad hoc committee and reiterated the projects from the April 18th meeting, again, including the HVAC replacement. So this has been a consideration for the board for at least a couple of years. It was also something that I brought up on July 16th, 2019, when I spoke to my goals that were ultimately supported by the supervisors. In my goals, I specifically called out mechanical systems, but we had a pretty lengthy discussion about my concerns about our HVAC systems, and particularly the fact that we have many units, over half of the units in the county are on R22, which we'll talk about a little bit more fully here in the presentation. So I don't expect you to read all of this. I provided a link later so that you'll be able to look at it, but I wanted to provide a couple of important talking points. Government Code 4217 is a procurement method, and it's a relatively new procurement method. As you'll recall, we've looked at other procurement methods like job order, contracting that the Public Works Director has brought forward. So we're constantly looking for new opportunities on how we can deliver projects in a more efficient way. Government Code 4217 is a procurement method that's allowed for public agencies that has very specific requirements. And I've indicated them here on the code, but I know it's too much to read. We can come back to it and to discuss it more if you like, but I want to touch on some very specific points that were in all that text that I just showed. For any public entity to use 4217 of the Government Code as a procurement method, it has to be an energy project, and there must be cost savings due to the project in energy cost. In addition, the project overall must be in the best interest of the public agency, and the board has to find these things exist in a public hearing, and that public hearing has to be notified at least 2 weeks in advance so that the public has opportunity to provide input. Government Code 4217 is widely used by cities and counties. I have used it in my past life in education, which is a public entity as well. And we're seeing 4217 being used a lot in school districts and community college districts, particularly because the state has specifically allocated money for energy projects. Cities and counties, obviously like us, haven't had the benefit of that same funding mechanism. So our projects, if you were to Google 4217, you'll see the school districts are utilizing it much more heavily, but you'll also find government entities, cities and counties up and down the state are using it as well for the same types of projects that we're using. So I was familiar with it in using it in other public entities, but because it was new to us here, I brought it to council, and I won't speak for council because they're in the room. That between Megan, y'all remember her, right? She's now in Yolo County, and Sarah, we discussed the procurement method. And one of the things that was obviously very interesting to council that we show through this project is we absolutely have to show the cost savings. And the way for us to show cost savings in examining this project was to have a feasibility study. The feasibility study, that's where my colleague John Mattice comes in from Compass Energy Solutions. I qualified Compass Energy Solutions through a process. I mentioned in my past life in schools, I had done many 4217 projects, but I didn't want an entity that had focused just on school projects. So I contacted facilities managers that knew of entities that had been doing city and county work, and multiple entities. It wasn't only Compass Energy Solutions. I contacted others as well. But through the process and doing reference checks on Compass Energy Solutions, they'd been doing a lot of work, most recently with the city of Clovis, and city of Clovis provided references on them. Their projects were very similar, their budgets were very similar, and most importantly, what their points about Compass is that they get the job done. They're familiar with working with smaller agencies and facing cost challenges, as opposed to some of the bigger Aircos and Siemens and whatnot that do these types of projects that do really big entities and really big energy projects. So they were a good fit for us in what we were looking to do. So Compass came on board, conducted a feasibility study, and that'll be further on here in the presentation, and John will present that to you. But it's important to note that after the feasibility study was completed, not only did I review it with council, I took it to the ad hoc committee as well, and have presented this information to the ad hoc committee because it is one of the priorities as identified in the minutes earlier to go back through the ad hoc committee. And then once I went through those steps, I've also sat down with the auditor controller and gone through the feasibility study as well and let her know that this item was coming forward. So depending on what the direction is from the board, she'll be involved quite directly if we take the next steps in considering how we'll fund the project. But before we get to the project itself, the feasibility study is real critical to understanding why we're asking for the potential of finance consideration. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Matthijs for him to present.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Al. We can go to the next page. We'll go through so what we did was we were tasked to do a feasibility study. We had three HVAC companies come out and take a look at the identified scope of work, which we worked with facilities closely to identify the equipment that is aged and R22 in order to get with compliance. And then what's amazing with this county is you have a facility person who's been here 35 years and has worked extensively on all the units, and he has extensive notes on every one of them. So it was a pleasure working with someone who understood exactly what the county needs as far as HVAC goes. We've never seen such detailed notes before in my 10-year career with with doing these projects. So it was a great asset to have Dave and Patrick on board with this. So we worked closely with them, identified and prioritize the units. And before I get into the details of the scope of work, we can talk about the project benefits. The first one is one of the most important, which is to comply with the mandate in 2020, January 1, to get rid of the hazard material they call R22. And then we get to this project's also going to reduce operating costs over the life of the equipment, and we used an 18-year number for the life of the equipment, although you've kept these units running for 40 years. So this is a very conservative number. Reduce maintenance repair by 70%, eliminate another $12,000 a year with AC services you guys contract out that come out and they take a look at all the units, then they tell Dave and Patrick exactly what needs to be done with them, and then Patrick and Dave take care of it. So that would go away with the new units. We're going to improve the efficiency by 36%. Currently, the load of the county is about 3 million kWh is the usage. We're going to reduce that load by changing out replacing all the HVAC units, and the boilers are gas, but just the HVAC units is going to reduce about 36%. So take about 1 million plus consumption off of the 3 million that you currently have. We're going to add controls to all of them so that the facilities can manage them remotely and can make sure when the units need to be off, they're off, and when they need to be controlled in a certain way, they don't have to come physically to the site. They can do it per their phone or their office. Infrastructure, we're going to make sure everything's to code. These units have been here for a long time, codes have changed, so we're going to make sure that when they're replaced, they're replaced properly. And then I just put a time frame down because it's to see if we get a notice to proceed, somewhere between 3 to 5 months, we can get this whole project completed, which would hopefully be before summer starts, because that's have a tendency to fail. The AC units is in the summer, so, or just before the summer. It's Murphy. Yeah, jump in anytime, please.
Just one quick question. You say improve HVAC efficiency and reduce kilowatt hours by established 36%. Does that also fall into reduce operating costs of $1.674 million over the life of the equipment? Does that come into the same equation also?
It does, because the 1.6 is the 18 million times the 93,000 that is the first annual savings. And I can get that a little further down the page, but and that's conserved because we didn't put any, since you have such an amazing utility rate in the county, they couldn't tell us if there was going to be an increase and how much that would be. So we just left it stagnant at exactly what it is. We know there is going to be an increase, just don't know what that is. So we left it conservative, kept it at 93 times the 18 years, and that's how we get to the 1.6.
Understood, thank you.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Jump in anytime, please.
That's at current figures, though. We pay 8 cents a kilowatt hour currently. And going up, it could go up at any time. So.
Right, that's why the 1.6 is a low conservative number. Right. Well, I think you'll exceed that.
Let me please offer some color commentary there. That I should have touched on that in the references when we talked to Clovis. That's one of the things that they noted was important, that Compass doesn't estimate or over promise what your savings are going to be. And that was important to us because of the very point that you said, that we know rates will go up over time. We have a great benefit that our rates are a lot smoother than typical PG&E rates. If they were doing a project on PG&E, they would have anticipated the approved rate increases over PG&E. But for us, we just kept the rate flat over the next 18 years, the life of the machine. So we're assured that the savings will be greater than the conservative estimate.
I do have a couple questions while we're on this slide. The yearly savings per unit per year. Could you figure what that might be for each unit that you change out, just kind of a rough number?
Yeah, well, the tonnages are different. So what we did was we have a software that we use. It's that we do the load with KW per ton, their age, everything's considered in that. That's the 3 main, and then also we use usually around a 40% usage with that, which we were told is not. Usually everything's running quite a bit here because it's not. Unfortunately, it's not controlled yet. So that's probably a conservative number too. So that's how we came up with per unit with an overall savings annually.
Yeah,
First year one.
Per ton makes better sense. I understand.
Agreed, because they're also different. I mean, we can't treat the 40-year-old unit like the 15-year-old unit or the larger ones and the smaller. So there's a formula for that.
So on remotes, would you be looking to a Nest type operation or learning a thermostat or control system that would learn use?
Yeah, there's so much out there now, and you can go Cadillac, expensive, bells and whistles, or you can just the county has a great relationship with Delta Controls, and what allows the county, when you're working with somebody like us through Government Code 4217, is we can choose whoever we want to work with, and we're 100% neutral. So we want to choose somebody who's first of all qualified. Secondly, if they're qualified and have a relationship with the city or with the county, that's what we want, because of the ability to answer calls or address the system if there's a problem or answer questions. Or somebody local is what we prefer. So what we're doing now, currently you have Delta Controls, and it's not the, which we're pleased with, it's not the bells and whistles that you really don't necessarily need. And so they've done a very good job as we qualified them, very good job on what they've given you in the past. So we're using them again to come in and replace what they have already, keep what they have, and then add to, which I'll show you in the control side of it, add to their current controls. So it's going to be standardized.
Okay, and I have a third question is, we're going to be using a HERS rater?
A what?
HERS rater,
What's that?
talking about airflow? I'm talking about airflow. In other words, where we have to pressurize the area and determine leakage.
They don't require that quite yet per state standards, but it's come down the pike.
Okay, because I know in residential it's been required for a number of years. I just was wondering.
Even with the replacement of new units?
Yes, sir.
Interesting.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so scope of work, what we come up with when we looked at, there's somewhere between 80 units total, but there's 54 that really had fit the criteria of R22 and age. Really, I don't know how, out of the 54, I'm not sure how probably 35 of them are still running. So it's amazing what David and Patrick have done. It's unbelievable, really. So 54 AC units to be replaced. We have 2 boilers to be replaced. There's 2 gas units in one of the libraries that we're going to convert over to electric because of the rates that you guys have here are amazing. So that's going to be a savings in itself and easier to maintain. Delta control systems on all the units, and then we're going to standardize AC and boilers moving forward for the county. So we're doing all carrier barred systems for the wall units. Liebert, there's only a couple Lieberts that are specialized units that we're going to stay with that brand, and then Lars is for the current 2 boilers. Delta controls, overall, doing piece by, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Why would we be going from gas units to electric units?
Well, the electric, since you only pay on a blended rate of 8 cents per kWh, which is maybe 25% of normal, it's just an amazing rate. It's even if it goes up slightly, electric is a more cost-effective approach than gas for these two units.
I don't know, I guess I think
Oh, you like
of-
gas?
Well, I think of it where I live up in the snow, and when the power's out, we're all happy that we have propane.
Gotcha.
So, I
These
still have
units-
hot water, which I wouldn't if I had an
Electric?
electric hot water, or I sell the propane stove.
Even if the
That's-
gas works in these units, Marita, the fan won't when electricity's out, so.
Oh, I know, but I can still have hot water and still make my coffee.
Right. It's a library, so, right?
I was just,
In your district.
I mean,
Oh, it is?
in my district.
Oh, that's in your district, the library that we're talking about, I think.
Well,
The
it doesn't
amazing
matter.
cost
I just-
savings we will have
I
is
just
why.
didn't understand why
And-
you were converting, that's all.
Well, it's still a good point, though, because we're neutral with what we're presenting. So this is what, in talking with facilities, I said this would be better for the library, is the reason we went this approach, more cost-effective. So on the control side, 26 are currently with Delta controls out of those 54. So we'll replace those units and then put those same controls back on them. And then 28 will receive additional controls. The benefits are below. It's all facility-driven and comfort-driven. So it can be done on, there'll be, in certain places, there'll be overrides where you can come in and hit an override for 2 hours, as opposed to having it on and staying on all day and all night. And there'll be alerts. The most important thing is the facility is able to get alerts and alarms if there's a problem, and we can set those levels on to what those alerts and alarms will be distributed, at what level, whether it's functioning, not functioning, or whether anything in between. So that's very important for the controls.
So let me live there for a minute. So
Sure.
I don't want to oversimplify the controls. Many of us know what our consultant in this case is referring to, but for the public's sake, it's not as simple as a thermostat. And in many cases, that's as simple as what we have. And so if the thermostat gets adjusted in a facility and it gets changed really low or really high in summer or winter, then the unit runs 24 or 48 hours. If for some reason the thermostats don't get adjusted, then those units are running literally 100% in some cases for days. And so this essentially is software that allows our staff to be able to adjust the units from afar and do troubleshooting without going out to every one of the units. So it's not just a matter of saving money because we're running the units less, but the units last longer, but it's a huge savings of time for our staff not to go. When we get to the end, I'm going to bring up a list of all of the units that we'd be looking at, and you'll see that some of them are in Arnold and Murphy's, and those require us every time to go out to those sites to be able to address anything. So it'll save us a lot of staff time and be able to troubleshoot those units.
See, another thing too is that your older systems were all on or all off. The newer systems are basically designed to be on all the time, and by varying frequency, et cetera, we can adjust the rates. So it's a whole different way of thinking.
Correct, you're right.
It's the start and stop that's a killer,
Right.
as we well know. I guess maybe I want to go back to my other question about HERS, because I know it's residential and I do have a certification for it. It has to do with duct testing. In other words, the age of these systems, it might be valuable if we haven't included it to actually do some duct testing in terms of whether or not there's leakage into our attics or crawl spaces, et cetera, and be sure that we've cleaned that up too. It's been in residential now since basically 2006, 2007, but I just went on the internet. I don't see a whole lot with government, so it may not be required, but it still might be a smart move to do considering the age of these buildings.
Sounds good.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm monitoring. So I'm hot and Gary's cold. Well, I'm cold, Gary's hot, right? So who gets to control that thermostat in this room?
Neither of you.
Actually, so,
Patrick.
yeah,
It's not as simple as that, but
I mean,
yeah, it's unfortunately, it's zoned, it'll be zoned the same. It'll just be controlled differently. And the controlling, that you can't control individual spots, but zones is what it'll be. So it'll be the same. So the only thing that changes is this. If usually there's at the thermostat, the Delta controls gives you maybe 5 degrees one way or the other. The controls or the facility sets that. So if you're feeling cold, you can put it up maybe 3 or 4 degrees, but you can't go up like 10. It just won't register. It'll go up to the
but
max.
who's you?
Well, they'll still be,
Or-
yeah, it'll be set, there'll be a standard set, then you have to talk to facilities and say, listen, maybe this is set too low, or maybe it's set too high. It'll be a work in progress, and it'll be something that you have to, I would imagine, adjust more than once for everyone.
And that's not dissimilar to what we have now, but what we do have now where they can be adjusted in many cases, then they stay on. If for some reason Patrick turns it up where we don't have controls because somebody's uncomfortable, then those units stay on, creating the climate control consistently, sometimes when we're not here. So there are variances, but it won't be vastly different than what we experience now. There'll be comfort ranges that are set.
Right.
Whose comfort?
Well, it's going to be yours for sure.
Uh,
Yeah, definitely now.
Obviously.
But that's exactly it, though. So it's going to be trial and error at the
You need
beginning.
it.
They'll set a base, and then it'll be adjusted. And it'll be adjusted by as much you say, listen, you call facilities, and they can do it right there. They don't have to come in, and then they can go from there. But the key is it is adjustable. And you got to find that sweet spot, I guess, for each room.
And you need a 4/5 vote, Marita.
Okay, things got moved around a little bit.
Did I miss something?
Oh, no, but the slide itself. Go ahead. You're okay. Yeah, the numbers. Get pushed over there. Project costs, almost 2.9 million. This is due to the 54 units, the 2 boilers and the controls. Again, this is the net project cost. We put at 2.4 because there was already 400,000 in for this year's annual budget to replace, I think it was 4 or 5 units, AC units. And what we did was we put an estimated, the market right now for at least what the city of Clovis has used in the past, same company which funds municipalities up to 20 years, has a 2.95 and a 3.0 over 10 and 15 years. And as you can see, what we put was the payment per month and then the annual payment next to it. So for example, on a 10-year, $24K per month, $288,000 for the year. The project's paid off in 10 years with those rates, and it's a net positive cash flow compared to what the budget of $400,000 is per year. Now you're at $288, and you're at $210 if you want to push it out even further. They go up to 20 years. This is just to give you an idea. Again, we bring options to the table, but we don't have a finance arm, or do we? It's a pass-through for us. We just bring it as an option to the table.
So I'll touch on some of these key points.
She has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to be clarified. Is this the project cost, estimated cost, based on the 54 air conditioner units, the 2 boilers, and replacing 2 gas, the scope of work?
Correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, it is.
So that's a nice segue to some points that I wanted to make. So we made some basic assumptions only to be illustrative in this particular slide, except for the project cost. This is the full scope of the project as presented. The $400,000 is we just use that as an example. That's currently budgeted for HVAC units. And at the time we anticipated, and Patrick's here, he can help provide clarity if I missed the target here, but we anticipated doing 4 or 5 units with that $400,000 based on what our experience has been over the past few years. So that's $80,000 to $100,000 per unit, depending on the size of the unit. And whenever we do one at a time, they're a lot more expensive. As you can see, 54 units and boilers and whatnot, if you divide that amount, that 2.8 million by the scope of the project, you'll find why we were considering 4217, because it allows us to do a project like this that is much larger, includes a lot of scope, and do it in such a way where we're not doing low bid and then having change orders to increase this over time. This is our price for that scope at this point in time. The interest rates that are here are only illustrative. Compass had just done a project, as I mentioned earlier, with Clovis. They've been working with them for a decade or more. John can speak to that, but at least 10 years. And one of their more recent projects, these were the rates that Clovis got. And the only reason we put them in here is so that we could have examples for what it might look like for us. I've worked with a financial advisor as well to get current rates, and I'll show that in my presentation. But I want to make sure for the board, we haven't presupposed this is what our financing would look like. The expected life of units of what we would be putting in place is about 18 years. I would never recommend that we borrow longer than the life of an item, although you'll see later in the presentation, we've got some units that are 44 years old, thanks to Dave Allen and his studious work. But we wouldn't use that for a cost estimate. So we stayed inside the life expectancy of the units to be illustrative of what it may look like for us. So currently we have $400,000 budgeted, and under a financing we would be locked into an annual payment that is less than what we currently have budgeted. Is there anything else you want to go on?
Did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I just, so you can comfortably say, even with not having hard numbers, that estimated life cycle cost savings of 1.674 million is a conservative estimate, and which could substantially go up over the years if, let's say, our 8 cents per kilowatt hour went up, and other costs, which you can't really fathom when it's like taking certain staff off the road to go check on certain HVAC issues, in the future. So we're saving on fuel, equipment costs when it comes to vehicles, and
That's a very good point. Very good
and
point.
more. So with the project cost being 2.889 million, we're essentially going to be at a cost over time of 1.215 million approximately, with this cost savings going down the road.
Yeah, we didn't put a couple things we didn't add to that. We didn't add what that time and it meant the actual time, manpower time, and we also didn't put the 12,000 a year in that's going to go away. We kept it pretty straightforward, but so there's additional cost savings to this, and they're tangible, but we just didn't. We want to keep it as raw as possible, because we could get down to the weeds, but it's a lot of guessing. We know it's there, but.
No, absolutely understood, and I can appreciate that. A conservative savings there is better than.
We want to hit that for sure.
Yeah.
So first, everything you said, absolutely correct. One piece I want to add in, what we didn't look at and isn't calculated in the savings is the difference between what our units currently run versus what more efficient units would run. It was 1-to-1 comparison. If a new unit has to run for 8 hours and an old unit has to run for 8 hours, just the difference in energy consumption on a 1-to-1 ratio, where frankly, we know it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. We know older units have to run longer to achieve the same amount of climate control, and we know our units, by virtue of not having controls, run far longer than they need to, and that hasn't been factored in either.
Right.
So it's really, this is the lowest possible bar we could get to. We did that by design, because I don't want to be coming here and saying, we absolutely promise we're going to save this amount of money and have too many variables in there that we couldn't predict. This is a very predictable number based on industry standards.
We also don't know the cost. There's two other factors real quick, like you mentioned. One is the cost of doing it with economy to scale. Two, is not factored in the savings to either, or is what the units are going to cost in 5-10 years. I mean, gosh, I don't even know where that's headed. So to your point.
You also, on your figures here, of 24K a month or 288K yearly for the 10-year, or even the 15, the 17.5 in 21, or 210, you can actually subtract 93,000 from either one of those numbers. Correct. So
Yes.
that's not the total cost here.
Right.
On the savings, and if the cost of electricity goes up, it's even more increased savings here.
Yeah, that's worst case scenario is the 288 and the 210.
Correct.
Right. Bottom line. And every time I don't put this slide in, I'm asked about this slide, so I always put it in with the environmental impact. From the EPA, these are the numbers that the 1 million plus in KWH annual savings is going to represent per these items that the county would understand, especially, garbage trucks, acres of forest saved, homes, electrical use over a year. This is life cycle.
Okay, so moving on, this is just going to be another snapshot similar to what Compass provided in their presentation. I worked with a financial advisor on this, which is a government financial advisor. So this is more like what a borrowing for us would look like. It's not got all the details in it, but I want you to see what the true cost of borrowing would be before we even consider this as an option. So there's a couple key things. Frankly, I'm not sure why we have the 2.6 in here. There's a couple of key points I want to make, though, in a financing. There's cost of issuance that has to get factored in, and these are things you'll see the notes here. There's bond counsel if necessary, financial advisor if required. Depending on what type of financing we go with, there's required outside consultants we have to utilize for the type of financing. Obviously, there's interest costs as well. These were the current rates. So depending on when and if we were to go forward, the rates could vary. If they're relatively low, they've been beneficial. If over time they go up, we'll be subject to whatever the cost of borrowing are at that time. So really, I just wanted to show, similar to what Johnny had provided in his presentation, these are more current rates, and I really wanted to illustrate that there is a cost of issuance to a borrowing that we'd have to incur. So obviously under 4217 and important to council is that we establish that there's cost savings in electricity. That's required under 4217 for us to even consider the procurement method. In our particular case, the cost savings isn't as much as you would typically see if they were working with the PG&E customer. All of us that are on PG&E know we're paying much more than we have the benefit of going through the JPA. But even at a very low energy rate, we still have energy cost savings, and that's an important hurdle to get over to even be able to exercise 4217 of the government code. One of the other important hurdles is having a benefit to the agency, and one of the significant benefits that we've talked about in other meetings is having the elimination of R22. It's a controlled substance as of January 1st. We won't be able to buy it or transport it any longer. The only way we'll be able to get it is from contractors that are reclaiming it from other units and bringing it to us. And then it becomes a commodity, and it's about 3 times as much as what a normal cost would be. I can't remember the year. I think it's 2023 where we can't have any units. I could be wrong about the date. I don't want to misspeak on that, but I know in the future, we won't even be able to have these units if we have any that live that long. There's a benefit in having all of our units modernized at one time because we have training on the units, we'll have parts that we can inventory rather than when I show you the list of units that we have, they're all over the board. So we're fortunate that we have somebody as experienced as Dave to be able to manage all these, but it's not the best way of doing business in the future. And then our controls will be standardized, so the way we manage all the units will be an additional cost savings. However, there's obviously a cost, and I mentioned those cost of issuance. It's really important to note whenever we borrow, just like most of us, when you secure a loan, you have to have some sort of collateral. And frankly, I see this as a cost. The county has been very wise in not indebting itself, and considering doing this increases our debt load, obviously, by the amount that we would be considering. So that's certainly a cost of doing the project. So there's some options. The pay-as-you-go option, that's what we're currently doing. Currently, we have $400,000 budgeted, but that's for 4 or 5 units. I'm going to show you the list of units. What you'll see is at least 20 of the units are past their useful life that we're replacing, and the ones that aren't past their useful life are added. We have units that are 40, 41, 44 years old that really had a useful life of 20 years. And if it weren't for the grace of Dave Allen taking care of these, we wouldn't have had that benefit. Obviously, we're here talking about financing, and then the last option here is we can defer the decision entirely. But before you do that, I want to bring up the list of units and talk you through some. I realize this is small. I'll show you the whole just to get started. There's some hidden columns and I can open them up. They're like the tonnage of the units and things like that. But basically, it's a list of the units and where they're located, the type of refrigerant they're running on, so you can see they're primarily R22 units, the age of the unit, and then notes about where they are in their life cycle. So I want to size this so you and the public can see it better. But if you look in this particular column and this isn't all the units, I can scroll down farther, but you can see the majority of the units, 44 years old, 44 years old, years old, 41 years old. Now, I wish I was 41 years old again, but it's not good in terms of an HVAC unit. I learned earlier in Josh's presentation that it's not necessarily good to talk about the district that a road is in, but to show where these units exist. Shoot, I'm losing some of my...
District 1.
They're all in Gary's district.
They actually are all over. Library Murphy's, Library Arnold, Moke Hill Museum. These aren't just these units that are here. So what's most important, I'm obviously being facetious about where the HVAC unit lives in terms of districts, but they're not just here at the county government center, and they're not just our employees that are affected either. Many of these are spaces that have public access and provide a community benefit as well. So I can certainly go through this list in more detail if you'd like to look at it, but I wanted to illustrate that they're all over the county and that the majority of the units we're talking about are beyond their useful life, with the exception of newer units we wouldn't be replacing, we're just adding controls. The ones that aren't past their useful life are not young either, so they're getting really close to being used up. And then the last piece before we come back to some direction from the board, I'd really like to give Patrick the opportunity to talk about some specifics and you hear his perspective about where he stands on the project.
Excuse me, Supervisor Moses, do you have a question, or do you want to wait for Patrick?
Well, maybe
My
this is
apologies.
more for Patrick, then that's fine. The thing that I don't notice up here, Patrick, is the SEER ratings on these newer units, because I think that would be important for us to understand.
Which rating?
The SEER, S-E-E-R rating. I just, you're looking at newer units here, 410, they're probably SEER 16 or
Yes.
somewhere there close to that. And you're committed that you're going to stay with a known gas, a 410 gas.
Yes.
So we're not looking at, like, newer refrigerators at your home now are running on propane.
No.
So let's be careful not to get exotic here.
No, absolutely.
Stay with a proven gas, and we've already got these in our system. We know how they work. We know when they leak, what happens.
Right.
Where you get into exotics, and you're going to get gumming and gooing and all kinds of garbage in them. So I think having a SEER rating on those newer units would be helpful.
Right, and also you make a good point, because when contractors come to us, they want to sell us the Cadillacs of everything. So we squeeze the fat out of that and come down to what do you really need and what is the most cost effective and energy efficient. We add that element to it. So we've done that squeezing very hard over the past 4 months, to your point. So that's,
Okay.
yeah, well made. And so, go ahead, Patrick, sorry, I didn't mean to take your...
Oh, no worries. Yeah, we're getting ready to go into my worst time of the year, which is early spring. Early spring, we start kicking the units in, we start dusting them off, getting them ready. That's where we start seeing the initial failure for the year. With the addition of PSPS, I'm anticipating a much greater failure rate with these units, because with the hard stop and the hard starts that we're seeing in those, that's the last straw that breaks the camel's back. So this year, we would normally be going in wondering which of these units are most likely to go, but this year we're already starting off where we have 2 main units that will not start this spring. So we don't have the luxury of saying, let's just wait and see. We already know we've got 2 units, and the situation with these is they're up at the animal shelter. So do we go ahead and spend the money towards the animals, or do we hold it for the humans, or do we just hope animals are good and we won't have any more failures this year, which is highly unlikely. So certainly overdue for the program, and Dave and I have spent a lot of time with them, and it's given me a lot of encouragement that in my opinion, we had a lose-lose scenario here because we could not get ahead of it. This gives us a very good option to get ahead of it and stay ahead of it. This campus has not been given this opportunity for a solid start since we opened the doors in '62. So basically, we'll be back to where we were when we originally opened the building, or opened the campus, and then we can hopefully maintain them for another 42 years.
So, I'm sorry, did I?
I do have a question. I don't know if you can answer it. We're going to buy 54 new units. We're going to take 54 old units off. What do we do with them?
Contractor
So
takes them
part
away.
of the RFP will be him disposing of them?
Oh, yes.
So this number, the hard number that you have here,
Right, it's a not to
that's going
exceed.
to, yeah, it's not exceed, because that could throw it up.
Yeah, we don't, and another thing with Compass is we don't, no change orders. This is it. If we miss something, it's on us.
You got that on film, right?
We take all the risk. We
got
take
that.
all the risk, yeah.
All right.
I have one thing to add to that. If they're getting rid of the old units, do we get any savings off of them reusing the R22 and selling it 3 times as much?
That's called a black market, and I have no idea.
I will speak to that creatively, because we've been in a situation of paying more and more for R22. The jail is slated to be demoed. I had to decommission 18 units on that building, so the company that decommissioned them would gladly take that R22, clean it, and then sell it for a great deal of money.
Wow.
We opted to, instead of getting a credit for it, we paid them a couple of dollars a pound to clean it and give it back to us. So I am now in possession of about 100 pounds of R22 that has a huge value to us, just getting us through this time right now, because Dave is depleting 10, 15 pounds every few months on units that are leaking.
So I'm not Patrick's
Understood.
attorney, but
So you just answered my question effectively, is they do give you a credit on it if they clean it up and sell it someplace else?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, understood, thank you.
So for the record, we have our 22, but we can't transport it, so we could only use it on the campus. We won't take it into any other sites
Correct.
throughout the county. Just wanted to be clear on that.
Just don't hit the
And I
highway.
won't tell you where I'm storing it either.
Either.
Cross state lines is out.
No, that's true.
So I typically am conservative and wouldn't normally suggest that we go borrow $2.5 or $2.8 million. This county has been very responsible in that way and not indebted itself. But at some point, we come to it being strategic to borrow, even though there's a cost of borrowing. In my own opinion, and I presented this in July, and Patrick can weigh in on it as well as his thoughts, but we're to the point where we have so many units that are about to fail, that $400,000 we're budgeting now isn't going to accommodate it. And we take some risk into the future if we take the pay-as-you-go method. And even though I don't typically support borrowing, in this case, it's strategic to flatten out what our expenses would be over the next 18, 15 years, 10 years, whatever we borrow, and we take that risk. And I talked in July about this being an unfunded liability, and that liability is only going to grow. So again, I do it reluctantly, but my suggestion is that we consider a financing option. In speaking with the auditor, she also had very good thoughts on how we might be able to bring the amount we borrow in looking at other projects, et cetera. So I just took a very dry read of it just to present numbers that we're familiar with in our budget. But I'm concerned if we don't do anything, this problem that's a $400,000 in this year problem in this budget could be much greater next year with the amount of units that we have that are at risk.
I'm going to try to bring this thing around. So what you're seeking from us is direction to continue this process, seek out the financing, you'll bring back to us a final deal.
We
Is that what you're
have
asking?
to bring financing back. What's most
Right.
important is that while I'm seeking direction to pursue the financing, I hope to avoid a situation where we say, hey, go investigate the financing, and then we'll see where we're at. I'd hope to test for a little bit better commitment, because if we go invest the time and effort, we'll also have to pay potentially for some of the consultants bond counsel, potentially, depending on the financing option, and invest a lot of time, and then we could we potentially go get the financing and then not be able to apportion it. So we can take it in steps. I can get scenarios and I can bring them back and present them again and then get more direction at that point in time. But it's not just as simple as, please go investigate more.
You want us to share some commitment before we start putting in all the extra time?
I'd really appreciate that.
Very good. Let me move to public comment, then we'll come back and we'll get you a final call. Anybody want to comment on item 29? Yes. Madam Auditor Controller, welcome.
Thank you. We do have a public finance policy and procedure guide, and it does establish a debt advisory committee, of which one board member, and so I would like to propose that the committee meet on this prior to doing anything.
Prior to closing a deal, or can we run these things concurrently?
Well, part of what the committee is supposed to do is to look at all the options and to consider whether there are other projects. So,
Yeah.
So how does that work with our planning here? Or what's your?
So in next steps, I mentioned if the board gives us the direction, then I'll obviously work closely with the auditor controller. And then as we pursue options, the debt committee would be the first vehicle to bring in and look at the options. I hope this doesn't divert from the importance of the debt committee, but I think it's important to have the direction of the board to be able to investigate it. Otherwise, I'm just talking about the project to the debt committee. So I took them in order to say, if the board's interested in this, then I can go start working on what different debt options are and put those scenarios together for the debt committee, and then they're vetted before I come back to the board.
Okay. Anything else? Or,
Nope, that's
okay,
it.
I'll open it up for the rest of public comment. Would anybody else like to comment on this before we bring it back for further? Don't go too far, auditor controller.
If the HVAC or whatever they're called, if you don't use electricity because of power outages, what are you going to use? That's my question.
Is there other public comment on item 29? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. How do you guys want to approach?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea that we just simply give direction, and then you can lay this out. Then we can decide from a debt perspective what it is that we can do to bring back to you the options and to the board to decide which of these options. And we may come up with 5 or even 6 options. There's a lot of ways that we can make this happen, and then let the board decide what they're most comfortable with.
Supervisor Stopper, make a statement. Supervisor Callaway, I apologize.
It's okay. On the cost benefit of financing, one of the options is you must have collateral, i.e. the county building. I thought we've already have the county building as collateral for the, I want to say the jail or the SO's office. So are we double dipping the?
We do have some that are collateral, but any county building that's not already leveraged could be utilized for collateral. And depending on the type of borrowing, there's lease options. I mean, we'll just have to investigate those through the debt committee, but there's several properties that are valued far greater than 2.8 million that would be.
Yeah, we'll give them the old jail. If Mr. Alt, one thing on 4217 I wasn't clear on. Under the first 42, so it said, state agency heads may make findings without holding a public hearing, yet for the county, we have to hold a public hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I would like to poll, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'd like to poll the board on following. The board is in support of this project looks forward to you bringing forward a final. Is that enough for you for what you need?
Yes.
Does that work for everybody? Let me do a poll. Supervisor Toffenelli? Yes. Supervisor Stopper?
Yes.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes.
Supervisor Callaway?
Yes.
I think it's a great project. Let's get her done.
Thank you.
Patrick, thank you.
Thank you.
I think Dave also.
Patrick,
30 years of keeping those machines running, that's impressive.
Yes. Thank you.
He's leaving, that's why we're doing it.
Yeah, now we're panicking.
He's gonna retire.
The one guy who knows how to fix this stuff. All right, Madam Clerk.
Okay. Supervisor announcements. In compliance with AB 1234, chaptered as Government Code Section 53232.3D, board members shall provide brief reports of meetings attended at expense of the agency at the next regular meeting of the legislative body. This report is required to include meetings attended for which there has been expense reimbursement, such as mileage, meals, lodging, etc., but may also, at the board member's discretion, include any other meeting attended by the supervisor on behalf of the county.
Who would like to go first? Supervisor Mills.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas to you. Supervisor Stopper?
I attended the Hardwood Advisory Committee. I'm not sure if the library charges us for having meetings over there, so I don't think there's any cost to the county. But it was a very, very good meeting. We had members of RCD there, CAL FIRE, the Cattlemen's Association. I mean, just a large group of people that are very mindful of the environment when it comes to hardwood, and the conversation continued on to a fuel reduction and other things that would affect the hardwoods. And we have a lot of people very involved in the community when it comes to these issues, and we have a lot of people putting forward a lot of good hard work. And there's going to be another meeting, I believe, tomorrow evening at Calaveras Consolidated to discuss fuel reduction, Gary, in our areas around there. I'm not sure if they reached out to you and asked if you would like to be there, but I think.
Yeah, but I have another commitment.
Oh, okay. No problem. I just want to make sure that you're aware of it.
I was aware of it, and I have a commitment already.
Yeah. All right.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Toffenelli?
Yes, I want to bring up that Supervisor Garamendi and myself attended the Facilities Ad Hoc Committee meeting last week. And as part of that report that I want to report out is that the first meeting in January on the 14th, or the second meeting, we're going to be bringing an RFP to the board for the board's acceptance to go out for pricing to bring down the old jail. We have, Aspen has put together the whole package. He had drawings and the whole package together. He had a few items to do on it that we discussed that he needed to add into the RFP, but that will be coming forward to us probably the second meeting in January for our approval. And then I would think it would be out for maybe 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and then bring back to us for the results and our approval. And it looks like sometime in March that building will start coming down. Finally. So.
Supervisor Callaway?
On Christmas Day, there'll be a community dinner free community dinner at the Native Sons Hall in Murphy's, and it's been going on for well over 30 years. And it's very much a community event, and I hope to see some of you there, if not all of you. 1 to 3.
Okay. I would like to, I have nothing to report under AB 1234, but I would like to thank staff and everybody who participated in a very productive year, and I hope everybody on this campus and in part of the county enjoys their holiday season, gets a chance to recharge their batteries a little bit, and I know we'll come out guns blazing for January. So I want to thank everybody, especially Madam Clerk, who's kept me in line all year. No easy task. I already ran through a council, so I was able to keep you. CEO, would you have anything to report? Madam Council? Madam Clerk? Very well. This meeting stands adjourned. We'll see you all next year.